Now friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Films. Whenever I watch a battle unfold on screen, even in a sci-fi fantasy genre film, I always begin analyzing the battlefield tactics and strategies. It's admittedly a bit odd and obsessive, but that's what I like to do. I always love breaking down and figuring out how these battles work and what the mindset of these characters and leaders are. On our other channel, Generation Tech, we've basically broken down almost every battle in the Star Wars universe. Now I want to take this concept and bring it over to Generation Films. And the first battle I want to analyze, of course, is the epic struggle we see in Avengers Infinity War's The Battle of Wakanda. So first, let's do a short recap because honestly, all these Marvel movies are kind of blending together for me. And to be honest, so are the DC films, now that you got wet Thor over here. Anyway, with Thanos on a warpath to recover all of the Soul Stones, the Avengers must find a way to stop him. This includes removing the Mind Stone in Vision's head without actually killing him. The only place with advanced enough technology that could pull off this sort of procedure would be the hidden nation of Wakanda. So the Avengers approach T'Challa, the king of Wakanda, and ask for permission to land there. To the Black Panther's credit, he says yes without much hesitation, knowingly exposing his entire nation and people to the grave danger that is Thanos. Captain America leads a small contingent of Avengers, including War Machine, Bruce Banner in the Hulkbuster suit, and ScarJo. The rest of the anti-Thanos troops are made up of Wakandan tribe warriors who are led by T'Challa. First, there are the Wakandan Royal Guard, an elite all-male unit equipped with the modified Yakwala, a short spear-like sword made famous by Zulu warriors. The Royal Guard was more of a defensive unit and fought in formation with great cohesion. Then there was the Dora Milaje, an elite all-female unit who served as personal bodyguards to the king. They were outfitted with longer modified T'Challa lances made popular by Central African warriors. The Dora Milaje were vicious close-range fighters and specialized in covert operations, and also made great shock troops on the battlefield. The Jabari tribe or mountain tribe were an odd bunch of warriors who had rejected the use of vibranium weapons and tech. They're armed with simple spears and unmodified knob carries, a club that was popularized also by the Zulu. Although their weapons were primitive, most of the Jabari tribe warriors were massive and very muscular. Lastly, there were the border tribes who were in many ways the gatekeepers of Wakanda. They disguised themselves as simple farmers and traders to deter outsiders from venturing into Wakandan land. They are also tasked with guarding the entire perimeter shield of Wakanda. So it kind of makes sense that the border tribe was mainly equipped with energy shields and a mambale, a sickle-like short sword from Central Africa. Immediately after the Avengers arrive on scene, Thanos' forces arrive as well, and begin landing plummeting to Earth right outside the Wakandan perimeter shield. It would have been interesting to see what would have happened had these dropships landed exactly on the shield. Most likely they just would have disintegrated, but there is the possibility they could knock out at least one or two portions of the shield, making it much harder to defend Wakanda. As the dropships land, two of Thanos' minions, Proxima Midnight and Colt Obsidian of the Black Order, arrive to negotiate terms, which turns out to be completely pointless. Meanwhile, the main Wakandan forces have arrived and have assembled on the battlefield in small infantry block formations of about 100 warriors or so. They fan out into a long line no deeper than 2 infantry blocks. This is an old tactic. By extending their lines, the Wakandans make it harder for the enemy to flank them, but also weaken the middle of their formation. And although the enemy was still unseen, Bruce Banner had warned T'Challa that the Black Order would have huge numbers with them. And he wasn't lying. Hundreds, if not thousands of beasts known as Outriders started pouring out of the Black Order's dropships. The Outriders were incredibly powerful 6-limbed beasts with superhuman powers and just intelligent enough to understand some rudimentary orders. They didn't have to use weapons because their bodies were weapons, and they probably were way too stupid to aim a gun or a blaster. Now, at first glance, the infantry blocks deployed by the Wakandans seemed kinda silly. The Wakandans were an extremely advanced civilization that had mastered tech that the rest of the planet could only dream about. So why are they using such antiquated battle techniques? Modern combat formations usually involve soldiers spreading out and taking cover when they come under fire, and then using suppression and flanking maneuvers to counterattack the enemy. But that's only because modern infantry units are also fighting enemy combatants armed with ranged weapons, and sometimes even area effect weapons like machine guns and explosives. It makes no sense to bunch up, and spreading out your units also increases your potential attack angles. But an enemy like the Outriders are melee combat focused, so the only thing the Wakandans really have to worry about is keeping them from reaching their defensive line. The speed at which the Outriders are moving at also makes them incredibly dangerous when they are charging. Creating a formidable defensive line with spears and a shield wall is designed to mitigate the power of the charge and sometimes even use the enemy's momentum against them. So while deploying in large block formations might seem antiquated, it's actually the right choice specifically in this situation. And as stupid as it might seem for the Black Order to be charging an enemy wielding ranged energy weapons, there is a brilliance to this tactic. For one, the Outriders aren't human, they're incredibly durable monsters that are very fast. Then there's also the fact that it's not as easy to stop a cavalry charge as you think, especially if the units that you're charging aren't used to facing this kind of attack. Putting units side by side, however, does give everyone in the formation more confidence and security. It also allows them to coordinate volley fire. Mass waves of projectiles tend to demoralize and cause enemy units to rout much more effectively than sporadic, uncoordinated fire. Now, the goal of this battle is pretty straightforward. The Wakandans have to prevent the Outriders and the Black Order from reaching the Wakandan capital, where Vision and the Mind Stone are being operated on. The Avengers must stop Thanos from grabbing the Soul Stone at all costs. Now, one of the first big mistakes that the Wakandans make is by deploying their troops so close to the border. They assume that the enemy forces would only be deployed on one section of the border. By deploying so close to the border, they leave the rest of the capital behind them easily open for the picking. As a matter of fact, immediately after landing, a group of Outriders had already begun outflanking the tightly packed Wakandan formation. Sensing that the enemy was about to surround them and make their way towards Vision, the Wakandans had to react quickly. T'Challa makes an interesting call here and opens a section of the shield wall which redirects the mindless Outriders towards the front of their formation. While this is a good way to redirect and control enemy movement, which is always a plus in the middle of a battle, the Wakandans then take advantage of this by creating a kill zone. Instead of using ranged weapons, the Wakandan army charges the enemy forces. When ranged units are fighting against melee units, the name of the game is keeping the enemy at a distance. Engaging the enemy at melee range completely destroys your ranged advantage and puts you in the way of harm. And in this case, despite how well trained the Wakandan infantry is, they are clearly outclassed by the incredibly strong and fast Outriders. What T'Challa should have done in the beginning of the battle was withdrawn his forces back to the capital. This way he could effectively condense his forces and fortify the ultimate target and goal of his enemy. The Wakandans were outnumbered and definitely didn't have enough troops to defend the entire border. Instead of putting large formation of troops at the wall, T'Challa should have sent skirmishers and mobilized infantry to harass the enemy forces streaming through the wall. Strangely enough, T'Challa also failed to deploy the Wakandan Air Force, which could have done a ton of damage, especially to the Outriders that were bunching up on the other side of the Wakandan energy shield. Just look at how much damage War Machine can do. He's essentially an attack chopper. The Wakandan infantry were far too exposed in that open field. This becomes even more apparent when those giant death wheels begin carving through their formation. And the Wakandan infantry were equipped with melee-focused weaponry. Although some of these weapons did have ranged ability, they definitely weren't as effective as, say, Bucky's M249 Saw or War Machine's Napalm. It's almost as if the King's personal bodyguard were equipped with ceremonial weapons rather than functional ones, sort of like what you would see with the Papal Guard in Rome. The lack of efficient ranged weapons might be why the Wakandans charged into melee range in the first place. It could also be due to Wakanda's protectionist and isolationist nature. Despite their advanced technology, the weapons created for their military seem more focused on tradition and honor rather than practicality. The reason why the United States has one of the most formidable militaries is not just because we have such a high budget, but it's because we're constantly engaging in battle, testing doctrine, tactics, weapons, and equipment. The battlefield is constantly changing, and both sides are engaged in this back and forth chess game where they're trying to one-up each other using different tactics, equipment, and weapons. The Wakandan military had not been involved in a wide-scale conflict probably since the foundation of their nation. It's also possible that their distaste, and some might call it fear, of the outside world made them ignorant to modern battlefield doctrine and weapons. A similar isolationist notion was adopted by the Ming Dynasty in the 15th century. In many ways, the Chinese were far more advanced than the rest of the world at the time, but quickly fell behind after centuries of arrogance and neglecting outside development and advances. By the late 1700s, the Qing Dynasty was powerless in the face of European military might and imperialism. Another example of advanced technology facing well-tested low-tech technology would be the earlier versions of the F-4 Phantom that the US Air Force used against older Vietnamese MiG-17s during the Vietnam War. The F-4s were heralded as a huge advancement in technology and relied on a variety of newly created air-to-air missiles. The Air Force assumed that the larger and less maneuverable F-4 would never have to get into a turning battle or close-range dogfight with the smaller and incredibly agile MiG. The Air Force was so confident in the F-4's long-range ability that they didn't add cannons onto the jet, and they also didn't train the pilots much in any close-range fighter maneuvers. However, when the F-4s began engaging the MiG-17s, they found out that their missiles were incredibly inaccurate and unreliable. The best performing missile they had at their disposal was the AIM-9 Sidewinder. It had a failure rate of 37%, and even when it was fired, it only delivered a kill 15% of the time. The AIM-7 was even worse, and the AIM-4 was designed to hit slow-moving bombers. And so the F-4's kill ratio dropped down to 2-1 against the MiG-17, which would be unheard of today for an American fighter. As the war progressed, the U.S. Air Force modified and upgraded the Phantom to meet the challenges of the battlefield at the time. I think the Wakandan military would drastically change their approach to warfare after the disastrous Battle of Wakanda, starting by giving their troops modern weaponry, especially the mountain tribe, who essentially are bringing wooden spears into combat. And it really wouldn't be that difficult to modify the Wakanda military into something unstoppable. The energy shields that the border tribes used were already quite incredible. Combine that with vibranium-plated body armor and blaster rifles, and you'll have a force far superior to anything else the rest of the world has to offer. So guys, that is everything wrong with the Battle of Wakanda, but I'm sure you guys have a lot to add, so I look forward to seeing your comments in the section down below. Don't forget to subscribe, hit that notification button so you don't miss out on the rest of our Avengers Endgame coverage. And as usual, my name is Alan, reminding you that life is a movie, and you are the protagonist.